On today's show, we'll preview Summer League for the Atlanta Hawks, including the newly released roster and the schedule. We'll talk about Kobe Bufkin and Mouhamed Gueye signing contracts. Then we'll look ahead to the rumors or rumblings, however you want to put that, about Pascal Siakam. Is he available? What would it cost? All that fun stuff and more on the way.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1514 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you deep into the night on a Monday evening into Tuesday here in early July. And today's podcast is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. Make every moment more with FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. And also at the top of the podcast, I should tell you to make us your first listen each and every day. Check us out and subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts, places like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. We should be there, and definitely check us out. And we appreciate you being here on the podcast today. A busy show talking about all kinds of things. In fact, some of the draft picks for the Hawks signed today. Las Vegas Summer League roster is now available. The schedule for Las Vegas comes because that's starting on Friday. And at the end of the podcast, we talk about Pascal Siakam and some more rumblings there with regard to the Hawks, a potential pursuit of the all-star forward from the Toronto Raptors. But first, the most recent news. On Monday evening, the Hawks made a couple of draft pick signings. First, they announced that they signed number 39 overall pick Mouhamed Gueye to an NBA contract. I said immediately and reported immediately that it was not a two-way deal, and that was confirmed immediately after that. Mike Scotto of Hoops Hype, though, brought the details, and it is a 4-year deal worth just over $7.6 million in total. Mike did not report this detail, but using what the numbers pretty much have to be in order to match the reporting, it would be a rookie minimum in the first year, about $1.1 million, and then $1.9 million in year two, $2.2 million in year three, and then year four in a 4-year deal with the newly used and newly created rookie minimum second-round pick exception, however you want to say that. Year four has to be a team option, which would be for about $2.4 million for the 26-27 season. So, of note, right now, we don't know how much of this is guaranteed. It could be entirely guaranteed until the team option, but we don't know that just yet. I've not seen that reported anywhere, nor have I been able to sort of track it down. So that's the first question that I have beyond this. But at any rate, this makes complete and total sense for the Hawks, especially because, and for me, it would have been even more surprising if they had not done this, but once you trade back into the second round to draft Mouhamed Gueye in the top 40, and I think everyone acknowledges that while Gueye is a very interesting prospect anyway, he's much more of a long-term upside bet than a low-ceiling player like maybe Seth Lundy might be. But getting a guy like that in the top 40, it kind of makes all the sense in the world, and it would have been pretty much not the right decision to not do this kind of deal. Getting him locked in at 4 years for a very, very cheap team-friendly contract is very, very friendly. That's part of the appeal of this new exception that the entire league has access to in second round, is to incentivize teams to have these guys locked up long-term. If it doesn't work out, it's cheap enough where it's not going to bite you really at all. So there's not really much downside of that. Yes, you could give him a two-way contract, but then you're dealing with restricted free agency potentially in 2 years. This is much more logical to do with a top 40 pick. Guys drafted in the 50s, sure, two-way contracts, see if it works out. But they really invested. They traded a pick for this pick, and top 40 picks are generally have some currency. So I think this is definitely what I assume was going to happen along the way. It happened pretty quickly, and we'll see about the guarantees. But certainly a very team-friendly deal for the Hawks, and a good idea to use that exception when you have access to it for Atlanta. Then shortly after that, the Hawks also announced that Kobe Bufkin, the first-round pick, 15 overall, signed his rookie scale contract. A lot less mystery on this one because first-round picks have a rookie scale, so where they're kind of slotted into a certain wage scale. There's a little bit of flexibility, but not by much, honestly. So that's not a surprise at all. He's going to be guaranteed. It's more guaranteed money. His first-round pick, all that stuff. I got some questions about Pascal Siakam, about Bufkin today. We'll come back to that later on in the podcast. But Bufkin can now not be traded for at least 30 days. That's an important caveat. Now that he is signed officially, that's very notable. He'll make just over $4 million as a rookie and about $4.3 million as a sophomore. And then, as with all first-round rookie scale contracts, there are some team options for year 3 and year 4. Those are that's the same as it always is. And then a year out, you have to decide on the team options. The way this always works basically is that unless things go terribly wrong in the first 2 years, year 3 is almost always for a guy in the top 15 going to be guaranteed and locked in. And then year 4, same kind of thing. The bar's pretty low to clear that at the cheapness of that deal, but we'll get into that later on if we need to. But anyway, Kobe Bufkin's now signed as well. That does leave Seth Lundy. He's the only one of the draft picks that's not been announced as a signing just now. Nothing to panic about. It's still very early in the process. Could be a two-way, could be another one of the deals like Mouhamed Gueye signed, and the Hawks have some choices to make on the rest of the roster. I won't do a full breakdown now, as I did one the other day on the podcast, but with Gueye now signed and Bufkin locked in, the Hawks have 15 guys on guaranteed contracts. That includes Rudy Gay, who they might waive or buy out. Keep that in mind, but you have to count him for now. It's some real money that they have committed and guaranteed. So 15 guys, that's a full roster as it is. Then you have 3 guys on non-guaranteed deals: Bruno Fernando, Pete Krejci, Tyrese Martin, and then you have Seth Lundy. So you essentially have 19 players that could be on NBA contracts. You have 15 that are definitely on NBA contracts, 3 on non-guarantees, and then Lundy could be either a two-way or a full contract. So certainly a lot of business to be done for the Hawks at this point in time, but 2 of the 3 draftees are now signed. No huge surprises, but Mouhamed Gueye structure definitely very interesting for the salary cap nerds among us. Now, we turn our attention to Las Vegas, where the Hawks will open up Summer League on Friday. We'll talk about the roster in a second because that was finally announced officially on Monday morning. But as far as the schedule is concerned, the opener is Friday, 10:30 p.m. Eastern time. So 7:30 p.m. local out in Las Vegas. They play against Sacramento. It's NBA TV on that one. The first game always gets a lot of attention and is prime for overreaction theater in all directions. Keep that in mind. Try to fight against that a little bit. It will get less attention this year, I think, nationally in particular, because Wembanyama and Brandon Miller face off about 90 minutes before that in the bigger gym on the campus of UNLV in Las Vegas. So the Hawks will be playing in the small pavilion. The TV focus will definitely be on the number 1 versus number 2, so keep that in mind. But I'll be in the building for that one, so buckle up. We'll have full coverage of that in this space. The opener is Friday, 10:30 p.m. against the Kings. By the way, the Kings actually have Keegan Murray playing in the California Classic this week, so I'm not sure he's going to go to Vegas, but even if he doesn't play, they have Colby Jones, who they already signed, Kessler Edwards, etc. Sunday, they play the Nuggets after an off day on Saturday. Sunday's a 9:30 p.m. Eastern game, NBA TV as well. They have Peyton Watson on their team, Colin Gillespie, Julian Strother, Hunter Tyson, Jalen Pickett. Interesting team to face off with on that one. Then the Hawks actually have 2 days off, Monday and Tuesday, before playing on Wednesday, the 12th, and Thursday, the 13th. After the first 2 games are late at night on the East Coast, for those of us who have to stay up late, not a big deal there. But the last 2, well, I guess the 3rd and 4th games are in the afternoon. A 4 p.m. Eastern time game on Wednesday against Minnesota. A pretty boring Summer League team overall for the Wolves, but they do have Leonard Miller, who's pretty interesting, Josh Minott, Jalen Clark. And then Thursday, 3:30 p.m. against the Sixers, NBA TV. Philly is also playing in Utah before they go to Las Vegas, so we'll see who actually plays by the end of this run. But they have Jaden Springer, Jaquavion Smith, Ricky Council, Greg Brown, etc. on the roster. So 4 games scheduled. And then with the Summer League format as it is now, you're locked in for at least 5 games. So we don't know the 5th game just yet, but the first 4 games, again, quickly here, are this coming Friday the 7th, Sunday the 9th, and those are evening games. And then the afternoon of Wednesday the 12th, Thursday the 13th, and the Hawks will actually then play on either Saturday or Sunday of next weekend, depending on how the first 4 games go, and we'll have updates on when they're going to be playing and who they'll be playing, all that fun stuff. So anyway, that's the schedule for something that's coming up. After a break from our sponsors, I'll touch on the entire roster that was announced today, and really it's kind of a loaded group, so stay tuned for that. We'll have a full breakdown in a second, but first, a word from our sponsors on today's podcast. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Baseball season is in full swing. You take your first swing at betting MLB at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're a new customer, get 10 times the amount on your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right, $20 in your first bet. You'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. FanDuel has great promotions and each and every day. You get paid instantly when you win. The app is also safe and secure, and they have every kind of betting angle that you're looking for. They cover the whole range of sports. That includes MLB, NBA, WNBA, NFL, college football, college baseball, college basketball, golf, tennis, soccer, auto racing, and much more. They have different wagering options as well: live betting, props, spreads, totals, money lines, and there's no better place to bet all the baseball action, basketball action, etc. than America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today at FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get up to $200 in bonus bets. One more time, that is FanDuel.com/LockedOn. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. All right, we'll dive in now to the Summer League roster that is now official and locked in. Finally arrived on Monday morning. No huge surprises, but fans can now plan on who they'll actually be watching and get a feel for some guys. I'll say this first before we dive into the roster itself. Summer League rosters can and often do change. For example, trades, for example, guys just kind of backing out. There's no like firmness here. You don't have to announce it by a certain date. Game to game, things are very fluid. If you've been following Summer League for a while, you will know that I'm often, courtside getting an update about 10 minutes before the game that someone's not playing. It's definitely sort of a mystery box on the whole, so don't get too committed to all this stuff. But anyway, Antonio Lang will be coaching the Hawks for Summer League. He comes over on Quinn Snyder's staff as an assistant coach this year for the Hawks. He actually was with Cleveland before that, Utah under Quinn before that, and the rest of his staff on the coaching side is Sanjay Lampkin, Brittany Donaldson, and Ekpayudo. And the biggest headliner of the actual player on the roster is AJ Griffin is scheduled to play. Now, second-year players often play in Summer League, but Griffin was in the rotation for the majority of last year. Not too much to prove if you're AJ Griffin, honestly, in my opinion, but he's sort of in a sweet spot of a guy who might play but not play the whole time. I'm not reporting that by any means, but again, this has been time and time again, not just the Hawks, but across the league. Second-year guys who are kind of overqualified might play a game, maybe two, maybe even three, but it will surprise me. It won't shock me. I won't fall on the floor, but it will surprise me if he plays the entire week in Las Vegas. But he is the best player on the roster and certainly a headliner. And keep an eye on AJ. Of course, it definitely adds to the talent level to have AJ Griffin there because he is, in my mind, overqualified for Summer League at this point in time. The other one people were kind of worrying about or wondering about or asking about was Jalen Johnson. He is not playing, and that is not a surprise to me, nor is it really notable in my mind. Most third-year guys do not play Summer League, especially when they're already in a rotation like Jalen was this last year. He is really young and, of course, had that rookie season that was kind of a washout in some respects, but he could have played. It wouldn't have been crazy, but I was not expecting it necessarily. And people were asking, I wanted to at least point that out there. He's not going to play. That's a very normal thing, so nothing to be concerned about. The rookies, as you expect, will all be there. First-round pick, Kobe Bufkin. Second-round picks, Mouhamed Gueye and Seth Lundy. Two-way signing, Miles Norris is on the roster. We talked about those guys a lot, obviously, already in the podcast. We'll have more on them as the Summer League unfolds. I posted a new episode, by the way, on Sunday evening with Bryce Hendricks of Upside Swings talking about Mouhamed Gueye exclusively, which is nice timing after he signed a contract today. So that's definitely still available on this podcast feed for about 30 minutes on Mouhamed Gueye. I had a show last week, about 25 minutes or so about Seth Lundy from Penn State and Bill DeFilippo of Dime and UPROXX. That's on the feed as well. I'll have another show later this week, actually, that I've already recorded with Dylan Burkhardt of Hoops about Kobe Bufkin. So I've done shows on all three draftees, and those will be up in the near future if you want more on those guys before Summer League actually begins. Then, past the rookies, you have two guys on non-guaranteed deals that are on the NBA roster right now. Tyrese Martin and Vit Krejci are both playing. At least they're on the team. Martin was almost a lock to be there in my mind as a second-year guy who was drafted by the Hawks just a year ago. No surprise there. Vit was not as much of a lock to be playing, but he's still very young, 23 years old, has a lot to prove, non-guaranteed guy, so I'm sure he wants to have a positive sort of session there in Las Vegas, but we'll see how much they play. And all that fun stuff, but obviously it helps to have two more, bona fide NBA kind of talents on the roster. Then there were a couple guys that we talked about earlier with Brian Schroeder that were Exhibit 10 signings for the Hawks. Jarkel Joyner, David Singleton. I would expect those guys to not make the team necessarily, but they were notable inclusions. Joyner, a very good guard at NC State, smaller guy. Singleton's more of a knockdown shooter out of UCLA, so guys to keep an eye on there. Then you have the rest of the roster, which we're not sure about coming into today. It would be a surprise to me, and this was the case before anything else happened today, even if anybody that was not already on a two-way or on a full contract made the team on the Hawks. Number one, this is a roster that's already very, very deep, so keep that in mind. And also, generally speaking, it is the exception to the rule whenever a guy that is not already planning to be on a team makes a team in October. Like, could they hand out a training camp invite? Sure. Exhibit 10s? Sure. But as far as like the rest of these guys that we're about to talk about, it is certainly more likely than not that none of these guys actually make contributions for the big league club this year. But still, some notable names to get into. So first, Tyson Etienne was a fan favorite last year at Summer League to the point where I got lots of questions about whether he actually is going to be on the team. That was never going to happen. But he's back as a guard after spending a lot of time in College Park this last year. He did struggle for the most part at the G League level this year, but a guy who I think fans like and had a big game last year in Summer League. Fiondu Kabengele also is an interesting big man, a first-round pick in 2019 out of Florida State, has bounced around a lot, has pro-level talent, though, was on two-way last year with the Celtics, also the nephew of former Hawks center and notable Hall of Famer, Dikembe Mutombo, so a guy that people will recognize, and certainly a better than average, like, summer league kind of filler guy, certainly. I think he's probably the guy that I would say has the best chance of cracking the training camp / two-way group for the Hawks, just because he's been there before. Again, he was on two-way last year for Boston, so he's close to the league through that lens. Brady Manick is playing. He actually played with Trae Young at Oklahoma, which is kind of funny. Good college player, was a 5-year guy in college, 6'9" shooter, Oklahoma and then UNC. Doesn't do much else, but certainly the shooting is appealing. He played in Australia this last year, undrafted in 2022, and played last year in Summer League with the Hornets. A couple of former Tennessee Volunteer players, Uroš Plavšić, I believe is the way you say his name, and Yves Pons. Plavšić is a 7'1" center, could be sort of, one of the older guys on the team at 24 years old. Pons is really interesting. 6'6" wing, really good athlete, played 12 games last year for the Grizzlies. 2 years ago for the Grizzlies. Has some talent, really good athlete in general, played overseas last year. So another kind of sleeperish guy, but has some real tools on the wing. And look, I could go over this over and over again. I'll have more on Summer League stuff. We'll be covering every game in Las Vegas. I'll be on the scene talking to these guys, etc. But this is a pretty good Summer League roster, let's just say. So just to put it all in perspective, you have a real guy in AJ Griffin, who's already kind of proven to be an NBA player. Then you have Martin, Krejci, Kabengele, and Pons, all who have played in the NBA. Then you have the 3 draft picks, headlined by Bufkin, plus the guy in Miles North that you already signed to a two-way. So that's already, you're up to like 4, 6, 7 players that you're already sort of invested in. The Hawks have 7 guys in Las Vegas: Martin, Krejci, Griffin, and then the 3 draft picks and Miles Norris. That's 7 guys that are already, at least currently, on the roster in some form. That's pretty good for a Summer League team. Then you throw in some real guys in Kabengele and Pons, etc. So I told the story before, but my first time covering Summer League was about a decade ago in person. And when I was there the first time, the Hawks had exactly 1 guy on their roster that had any chance of making the team. And it was Mike Muscala, who, of course, is still in the league right now, which is kind of impressive in a lot of different ways. But so this is a far cry from that. There could be as many as 7 guys in the organization in October that are on this team, which is pretty impressive. Kind of a spoiled situation for the Hawks. Even if Griffin only plays once or twice, etc., there's plenty to watch for and plenty to observe in Summer League, and not every team has that for sure. So nice thing to see there. As far as like analysis is concerned, I'll save most of it, but I did notice the Hawks didn't really load up on guards this time around. So I'm expecting Kobe Bufkin to have the ball in his hands quite a bit, which I would expect is, honestly, that's a good idea. I think even if you don't believe he's a point guard long-term, having the ball in his hands in Summer League is a good idea in general. They do have Jarkel Joyner, they do have Tyson Etienne, but for the most part, they did not like go out and get a guy that they had to play at point guard. So I think you'll see a lot of Bufkin with the ball in his hands at that spot. Obviously, I would like to see AJ Griffin do some creation when he's on the floor, when he's playing. The rest of the guys, though, that are interesting are not really in the backcourt. You have Griffin, Lundy, Martin, Krejci, and Pons, who are all kind of wing players. And then you have Gueye and Norris and Kabengele and Manick at the 4 and the 5. So we'll see how they use Mouhamed Gueye. I'll be interested in that. Lundy is pretty plug and play in a lot of different ways. But yeah, lots to get to. We'll have all that covered starting on Friday evening with that late night game, and then Sunday, and then twice next week. So we'll have all that. Hopefully some guests coming on the podcast as well, and full breakdowns from Las Vegas. All right, so one more segment to come about Pascal Siakam. Hold on tight for that. But first, a word from our sponsors on the podcast today. All right, and it's time to talk about the latest rumblings with regard to Pascal Siakam. This came up before, earlier in the process this summer, and I talked about it a little bit, but there's still kind of rumblings out there. I hesitate to call them trade rumors because they're not really rumors at this point. It's kind of just like buzz and rumblings kind of thing. It hasn't risen to the level of a 5-alarm fire just yet. But I got a lot of questions the last couple of days. I figured I might need to circle back on this a little bit. So it started out with Yahoo's Jake Fisher, who was on this podcast actually a couple of weeks ago, reporting interest from the Hawks across multiple times back in June and into late June, et cetera. That ESPN's Zach Lowe brought up Siakam and the Hawks on a podcast over the weekend. Then Sportsnet's Michael Grange, who covers the Raptors very well, brought the Hawks up again on Sunday on Twitter, and then on a podcast with Will Liu called The Raptors Show about how there is, quote, a lot of noise around Siakam in general, not only for the Hawks, but certainly a lot of noise around him overall. And then said there's at least sort of the potential for movement. He's heard the Raptors are examining things overall. Again, not talking about the Hawks only, but talked about the Hawks a couple times in that conversation with that podcast with Will Liu. So again, like no Woj bombshells, no packages being thrown around, a little bit of buzz, and certainly some interest. I'll say this much for now. From what I have heard, and I would say more than once, I've heard the Hawks are interested in Pascal Siakam. Now, that's not a huge bombshell. That's what Jake reported, but I've heard the same. No one that I've spoken to, though, has pointed to like really specifics. None of the parties listed above also like talking about, Jake and Mark Steinstein a little bit about it, that kind of thing. Michael Grange, Zach Lowe. No one talked about like what a deal would actually look like, how close it might be, whether something Toronto is actually really open to. That's also important. And from another angle as well, something to keep in mind is that Chris Haynes of TNT Bleacher Report reported around the draft said that there is a, quote, growing sentiment that Pascal Siakam, who's on an expiring deal, would not re-sign with the team who attempted to trade for him, as his preference is to remain with the Raptors, end quote. Michael Grange, again, today actually, or yesterday, said he believes Toronto is Siakam's first choice, which could impact the market. So it seems like someone in Siakam's camp is putting out there that he doesn't want to leave Toronto repeatedly, which makes sense. He may want to stay there. Obviously, he's making a lot of money there. But you put the whole thing together, it's kind of a shrug right now. I'm not saying it's not going to happen. I think it's definitely active in terms of like interest. I'm sure the Hawks have called the Raptors about Pascal Siakam. Number one, he's really good. He's a proven like all-star level player. There's a debate to be had of like how good Siakam is, like in terms of like top 20, top 30, whatever. But he's been on the all-star team. He's a very, very good basketball player. Give them a different element that they've had previously. Obviously him and DeJounte are kind of, maybe you could say in the same semi-tier. I think Siakam's a better player as he has been at this point, although he is older than Murray. All that said, Siakam also does make a lot of money and also is expiring. So that's always important to keep in mind. He, like DeJounte, is extension eligible. It is more easy to see Siakam signing an extension because he's already making a lot of money versus Murray, but they're both expiring at the same time, which is notable. Also, Siakam will be 30 in April. So a big long-term deal for him, either in an extension now or a new deal this summer, could include some real downside risk. If he's 34 at the end of that contract, most guys, not all, most guys are not the same at that age. So I got a question about Siakam being able to extend right now if the Hawks were to trade for him or if Toronto wanted to extend him. He is immediately eligible for a 2-year extension with the Hawks if they were to trade for him, going off of his current salary. So that's actually enough to give him a bunch of money, like $40 million a year or something like that. So that's a lot. He may want more years than that. And if he does, he could wait 6 months from the trade and then be eligible for a 4-year extension, which would be a lot of money. Again, lock him up until the basically age 34 season for Siakam. Now, some more details here. I'm not going to go crazy on the depth because the guy has not been traded to the Hawks yet. We'll have more on this if we need to. But to answer some questions I've been getting about him, he's making about $38 million for this coming season. That's a lot of money. The Hawks are well over the cap, of course, so they have to match salary on any deal for him, which means a lot of money has to go out in a Siakam deal. Even if everything else, you have to match salary. So it's unclear, at least right now, to me, whether the Hawks are aiming to bring Siakam to Atlanta to pair with DeJounte and Trey, or whether it's just a pair with Trey and maybe Murray goes out in the deal. So I'm not sure. It stands to reason that Toronto might ask for Murray because he's their second best player. He's a pretty interesting player, of course. And I think that Toronto likely, almost assuredly, views Siakam as better than Murray internally. But obviously Murray on his own is the closest way to get to Siakam without including Trey, which the Hawks are not going to do. So I think Murray could be in the deal. He could not be in the deal. That's unclear at this point. But let's just assume for a second that Murray's in the deal. He's making about $18 million this year. So the Hawks have to add almost $20 million into the deal if the plan was to send Murray out for Siakam. That means someone like DeAndre Hunter, for instance, who's about to start a contract at about $20 million a year, or Clint Capella, $20 million a year or so. But Toronto likely would not want Capella because they just paid 4 years, $80 million for Jakob Poeltl. So maybe you have a third team in the mix for Capella, or maybe it's Hunter. But needless to say, if you trade Murray as the main centerpiece, you have to add a bunch more salary, which is very, very notable. Anyway, from there, if Murray's not in the deal and the Hawks were to pursue Pascal Siakam, the most logical pathway would be Hunter as the main matching salary plus more. So, and if you're not including Murray, you have to add more in terms of like asset value because Hunter, even if the Raptors love Hunter, is not going to get you to, like as the main only piece for Siakam. So in terms of money, the Hawks could include Rudy Gay for salary matching. That's a negative asset, but at least it's expiring. Maybe they try to do Hunter and Capella, but the same problem exists with a third team probably having to have come in to get Capella off the books. Maybe they dare to include Okongwu, who makes a good bit of money now in year 4. I haven't heard anything about Okongwu being sort of available like that, but obviously for a star-level player, if you're not trading Murray, you might have to include Okongwu. I'm not sure what that looks like. It could also mean that Raptors ask for AJ Griffin, or Jalen Johnson, or both, or Kobe Bufkin. Again, I'm not saying the Hawks are going to do that. I personally would not include AJ in a deal for Siakam under really almost any circumstances, but Toronto is probably not going to ask for a lot. It's been reported also, and it was talked about behind the scenes, that Toronto liked Kobe Bufkin in the draft. They did pass on him for Grady Dick in the lottery, so that's notable. And they can't trade for him again for a month now, which I talked about earlier in the podcast. So, but I will say, if the parties agreed to a deal like in the next week, they could probably still do it around Kobe Bufkin and just wait 30 days. Famously, this happened with Cleveland back in when LeBron went home the first time, and they traded Andrew Wiggins or the rights to Andrew Wiggins for Kevin Love. They had to wait 30 days because Wiggins had already signed. But that's less about kind of prominently happened, but it's not unprecedented. It might happen again with like Miami and Jaime Jaquez if they were to trade for Damian Lillard, all that stuff. Anyway, I don't think that Kobe Bufkin would be the reason why the deal didn't happen. If that were to be, at least the 30-day window wouldn't be the reason, but keep that in mind too. So also importantly here, if the Raptors see Siakam as so much better than what the Hawks are offering, the Hawks don't really have a lot of draft picks to trade because of what they owe to San Antonio in the Murray transaction. The Hawks can trade the Kings pick, which is 2024 lottery protected, but the Hawks actually can't really trade any of their own picks other than 2029. So this year they have their own pick, but because they owe next year's pick, because of the Stepien rule, the Hawks are pretty limited on the first round picks they can trade, let's just say. Also, another guy they could probably wait on if they wanted to would be Bogdanovich. He's trade eligible in September if, for whatever reason, the Raptors really wanted him. That doesn't seem like super likely to me, but maybe that would happen. I don't know. Anyway, that's kind of, I'm named all the guys that are in the mix there. I'm not reporting anything. It's just kind of, there's hypotheticals. And basically, again, there's basically two structures that I can see. It's Murray as the centerpiece with less to go along with him than you might think, but still, I'm sure a little bit more for sure, like either Hunter plus or whatever it is. But Murray as the centerpiece. And then there's package 2, which is Murray not as the centerpiece, which means almost certainly has to be Hunter going out, and then Hunter plus whatever else, and you have to put in more assets because Murray's not in the deal. So anyway, that's kind of the rough setup. But listen, there's a couple steps here to kind of evaluate. Number one is whether Siakam's even available. I think he probably is on some level, but not super available. We'll see. Step 2 is whether he has any interest, and the Hawks have to figure this out as part of any talk because he's hitting the market in a year. So if he doesn't want to stay in Atlanta, if he has no interest at all, you can't really trade for him. At least in terms of putting the kind of value out there that I think the Hawks probably have to put out there in a deal for Siakam. That'd be a very big risk, especially with all the what you have to trade for him. Number 3 is whether you include Murray in the deal, and if you don't, how you fill the gap. So there's all kinds of questions, but like you have to figure all that stuff out: interest, availability, what your sort of price tag is. I would imagine my price tag personally, again, I don't work for the Hawks, would be a little bit lower. I would not be paying the Murray plus Hunter plus whatever else package that I think it probably is going to take, honestly, if it's my opinion. AJ Griffin, I would not include, especially if it's Murray plus Griffin. I definitely would not do that. Even if I wouldn't do that flat out. But maybe there's other constructions. I think Jalen Johnson, while you could argue him versus AJ, and I think that if you're getting Siakam, Jalen becomes a little bit more expendable than AJ because they kind of overlap a little bit. I'm not saying you trade Jalen because I wouldn't want to do that. I'm just saying if you have to choose one of the two at the end of the day, and Toronto says, okay, we'll do the deal with one of these two guys in it, I'd rather send Jalen in that sort of setup than AJ. But again, I probably wouldn't do that either. So long story short, Siakam's good. He'd very much help. I do think, as I said before on the podcast, I think that he fits better with just Trey than he does with Trey and DeJounte. But that doesn't mean you have to trade DeJounte for him or anything like that. So there's complicated stuff there. We'll talk about all the nuances when we need to, if we need to at that point in time, about the next contract and all that stuff. But there's some downside risk there with a guy of his age. He isn't like a flawless fit, particularly with everything else on the Hawks roster, but he's a good player for sure. And obviously you want to call on him, gauge the market, and see what happens next. And Toronto is sort of a black box when it comes to figuring out what they're trying to do, because they're kind of a mess right now. They just lost Van Vliet, they added Dennis Schroeder, et cetera. So that's a whole other podcast in a lot of ways, but keep an eye on this. I know I will be. And if something breaks or something sort of escalates, I will have more on that in the future. But hopefully that answers a bunch of questions that I got today about Pascal. Even Mark Steinson, I think in a Substack chat, talked about how the Hawks are still interested on some level in Siakam. So this stuff is hovering out there, let's just say. And we'll have more on that if we need to in the future. That will do it for today's podcast, everybody. Please subscribe to the show across podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, etc. I think I'm going to take the 4th off unless there's a big transaction. Obviously, if something major happens, I will do what I can. I have to fly on the 4th, actually. But I think I'm going to take the day off from the podcast unless news happens. And then I think you guys know that I will respond quickly. But I'll have at least one more podcast between now and the game on Friday. And then I'll have a podcast after the game on Friday. So stay tuned for all that stuff in the very near future. Again, one more time, please subscribe to the podcast. Please follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Hawks. Follow me on Twitter at BT Rowland. Thank you for listening as well, really always. And please share the podcast with someone else in your life that might be a Hawks fan. That'd be very much appreciated to help us grow the podcast across podcast platforms. All right, everybody, enjoy your July 4th, and we'll see you all next time.